Words matter too. I've been throwing around this word problem. I kind of talked about it. We still use that as that kind of back and forth. What we used to would have said maybe gambling abuse. I mean, that was never a term, but that's kind of where it would have fit. But people still say this, and this was a big word back in the day, degenerate gambler, right? My uncle was a degenerate gambler. He went to the horse tracks all the time. You heard that. That was nomenclature. And people still say it. DSM-3, anybody know where it was? DSM-3? Does that word help at all? Yeah.
Wasn't it compulsive?
Yeah, with what? With what else? Do you know what it was alongside with? What else was compulsive back in DSM-3?
Was it overeating?
Yes, trichotillomania, right? So gamblers are just like the people that pull their hair, right? That makes a lot of sense. Kleptomania, pyromania. So let's think about that. Let's think about the bias and stigma that goes along with that. You're a compulsive gambler. So I'm going to put you with the people who set fires for fun and the people who steal for fun and action, right? That right there has a lot of bias and a lot of stigma attached to it, right? So you're almost saying this was alongside criminal behavior, right? Who's going to come forward then and say that? DSM-4, it was denoted pathological gambling. The severity levels were kind of confusing, but it was what was it, Mike? Problem gambling, probable pathological gambling, and then pathological gambling. So it's kind of an interesting way to step that probable pathological, which is probably also a confusing diagnosis for the people that were given that. But pathological means abnormal, really, right? So that has some bias and stigma to it as well. And now we're a step down here with disordered gambling, right? So it's in chapter 3, substance use and related disorders, gambling disorder, mild, moderate, severe. And Mike will talk more about this. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Here's your DSM-5. There's 9 criteria. 4 to 5 is mild, 5 to 6 moderate, 4 to 5, 6 to 7, and then 8 and up is severe. This is old information. Brand new data just came out, but I wanted to give it to show you where we were. We've done 3 5-year prevalence studies, 2012, right when the casinos opened, 2017, which you're seeing, and 2022. So we just got the data from 2022. But 5 years ago, 10.3 of the general adult population was at some level of risk or problem gamblers. That's pretty high, right? You can see the breakdowns up there. Now, again, 1% doesn't seem like a lot. But 1% is 76,000 Ohioans. So the raw data is pretty impressive, right? That's a lot of people. But I think what's more interesting, especially for this presentation in our current landscape, is in 2017, 16.2% of Ohio adults stated that they sports gambled. This is, years before anybody even considered broad scale legalization, right? So a lot of people were participating in illegal sports betting and felt fine acknowledging or putting that on a report, right? What I can say is I can't give you all the information yet, but that number has drastically increased. Those numbers aren't public yet. Actually, just heard about them on Wednesday, but that number is bigger, right? And that number is bigger as it was collected in 2022, before we were operating. So what is that number really in March 2023 as opposed to July 2022? Also, way back in 2017, you can see in the blue, the form of gambling that had the most at-risk or problem gamblers was sports betting, 5 years before we even had it in the state, right? So again, what is this percentage in 2023?
Why is stock market considered gambling and not like investing?
Well, I think that's a really great point. Well, it is a gamble. You're putting in money on an uncertain outcome. So I think we could label it as gambling, but it's an investment that's really interesting because a lot of sports bettors would say that is what they're doing, right? I'm investing money. It's speculation, right? A team winning or hitting a certain amount is speculation, just like if the Dow is going to go up or down. And a lot of people, when you look at the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline call, and say what they're having problems with is the stock market. So I think that's why we put that in there, and you'll see that on a helpline report in a little bit. But they seem to be similar, right? I mean, it's chance, right? Oh,
Excuse me,
perfect. Helpline data.
you had brought up like when you were talking about compulsive, that category, and when you were saying, about being incarcerated. Well, how often does that happen? Because I don't, you know how with substance use, most of them are incarcerated multiple times,
Yeah.
but I don't hear that with gambling.
All right, great question. And I'll repeat it for the folks in New York and Georgia. So incarceration rates, arrest rates, et cetera, for someone with an addiction. Oftentimes, I don't want to say oftentimes, but individuals with gambling impacts can get into criminal behavior, right? Often financial related crimes, theft, fraud, things like that. And they get prosecuted and are incarcerated because that addiction doesn't really come out, right? But there's a great pilot program that just started in Cuyahoga County with the Cuyahoga County Justice Center, where they're all being screened and are getting diverted to Recovery Resources, which is a large treatment agency in Cuyahoga County. So they're getting diverted to treatment as opposed to incarcerated.
And then does the treatment include,
Like inpatient?
inpatient?
Yeah, I don't know all the details. It probably
Inpatient treatment for gambling?
So there's not a broad scale one in Ohio for inpatient, except for the Cleveland VA. So the Cleveland VA, Louis Stokes VA, has a 6-week intensive inpatient for gamblers. Of course, you have to be a veteran, but people come from all over the country to go to that program. And then there are other inpatient ones throughout the country: Arizona, Louisiana, Minnesota, Washington. So they do exist. The diversion one, I would imagine is intensive outpatient.
Just to add on that too, in DSM-4, it was one of the actual clinical conditions, the criteria of illegal acts tied to gambling. And so it was significant enough to where that we measured it as a diagnostic criteria. DSM-5 dropped it in 2013. And the reason they did that, it was kind of this big discussion about, what is it still clinically valid or not? Really what we found was that so many people met that condition that it really didn't add to the diagnosis. That even without that condition, there's still enough strength for the evidence for the condition that it really, you don't need it. So to your question, is it relevant? It sure is. And as you start talking to gamblers, you hear over and over about illegal acts they've used: stolen money, written bad checks, turned over, was it cashed out on 401s and depleted pieces, and then borrowed back and forth, embezzling. I mean, all of them are in there. So
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of high, you don't see as many with substance use because, I don't know, that's sexy in the media or something, but you see a lot of high profile ones pop up where a politician or whatever, there was a sheriff, taking funds. You see it happening, often.
A lot of times they don't have money to do both. So you don't really hear about it, but when I was going to South Oaks gambling.
Screen, yeah.
Screening, I would go into drug treatment program. And that's what they said. Well, I have to make a choice. I don't always have money to get my drugs if I come here. But they might buy a lottery ticket and hit a lottery ticket for $500.
Yeah, and the co-occurring rates are huge, and oftentimes is it just co-occurring, not just, but is it simply addiction for addiction's sake? I'm addicted to both, or people are using gambling to finance their drug addiction, right? So you really get into both, absolutely. Yeah.
Between males and females, who's the more problematic gambler? And then when you said the sports gambling participation has increased, what's been the driving factor now that it's legalize?
Yeah, so the question was, demographics, you actually see really equal, between the genders. And the helpline data has shown that for all time, really, I mean, it doesn't, there's not a lot of disparity between ages, genders, ethnicities. But you do see a little bit higher, non-white overall, but then sports much higher in Caucasian and younger men, absolutely. And you'll see that in some data as well. Why is just because it's available, because it's being pushed. People are stuck, free plays. We're going to talk about marketing and how that's a trigger, and Mike will get into that too in the panel. But really the gender disparity seems to be the same, not only with participation in gambling, but also those who are seeking treatment as well. There's just as many, women as men in treatment. But sports is leaning towards younger male and Caucasian. This is, there's a lot here, and I'll say it for the people online, and you guys, you might not be able to see it all, but helpline data for years was between 400 and 500 a month. So we have a problem gambling helpline, 400 to 500 a month. As we started getting into fall of 2020, you see the numbers jump up into the 600s a little bit. And then this back one all the way here, right, is January 2023. So the first month we had sports betting operational, there's 1,500, right? So we went from 500 to 1,500 in 1 month. That should be a data point that is getting covered and discussed, and we've done a lot of media about that. And it's kind of one of those areas where, in the help providing field, you don't want to kind of be a jerk and say, hate to say I told you so, but it was like, been talking about this for years, right? It's so accessible. But what you also saw was a big increase in this. So people are betting at a higher rate. They're probably seeing consequences sooner and more rapidly because of sports betting and its accessibility, but they're also calling sooner, which is good, right? There's a silver lining. The helpline is out there. People are getting to be aware that there's treatment, there's services, there's funds. So if they're calling sooner, we're gonna be able to help them sooner, right? Maybe diminish some of those consequences. So that is a positive.
I have a question. for you.
Yeah.
So right before the pandemic hit, I started having a lot of married couples who were retired coming in because they were gambling more.
Yeah.
And some of them were losing their homes. Is there any research on that? Or like, is there?
Yeah.
Like maybe 10 couples who came to my practice. And I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah, so there's some research. Obviously, that kind of research takes a while. So the question was about the pandemic and its impact.
I mean, no, like it was before the pandemic and they were retired.
Oh, right
Any
before the
research
pandemic.
Before, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I mean, the pandemic did have an impact. Lottery sales skyrocketed. I'm not going to say that they were, that's like the Ohio Lottery was celebrating, but a lot of people with maybe finding some disposable income with checks were gambling a lot. The Ohio Lottery had record revenue during that time. What was also interesting, when the casinos opened back up, I think they were closed for 4 months, maybe. The casinos opened back up at 30% capacity and had record revenue. So people wanted to gamble, and the few people that went gambling were gambling big, right? So record revenue at 30% capacity shows the extent at how much gambling was kind of craved or wanted. But I guess in terms of older adults and being retired and gambling, I mean, yeah, there's high rates of, I don't have it on this slide, but yeah, typically you'll see, if you break down into age ranges like 18 to 24, 25 to 35, etc., you do see 18 to 24 being the highest, and then the second highest is 65 plus, right? So maybe more time, more income, lack of other hobbies, so you absolutely see that.
They bus them from senior.
Oh, yeah,
buildings to the casino.
yeah.
That's-
Yeah, and I'm not gonna go as far as to say predatory, but venues absolutely cater to that population, right? Make you feel welcome and things like that. So absolutely.
But don't you think that it was somewhat predatory to have Jamie Foxx and Kevin Hart? And those commercials, it seemed like it was aimed just toward Black men. And it just seemed very predatory in how the rollout, building this expectation and this you know, can't wait till whatever day it went live.
Yeah,
And it was just, cause I was still studying for my endorsement then, I'm just noticing how often it was on.
oh,
TV.
the marketing and the promotions were, again, yeah, they were incessant, it was a bombardment, absolutely targeting certain populations. Absolutely, you know, with the promotions, right? All you do, I think it was a Kevin Hart one, he's like, the first time I saw it, I was like, is this gonna be one for responsible gambling? Cause he said like, bet 5, win 200, no way. And he like put 5 in and then he put his phone down and then it dinged, he was like, oh my God, I got $200. And I was like, oh, you're right. So like, and we're having conversations with operators about if you're saying you take responsible gambling seriously, and if you're gonna make an effort towards it, why not have someone of equivalency to Jamie Foxx or Kevin Hart do a responsible gambling ad, right? Why not, right? And Caesars has Peyton Manning and forget who BetMGM has. There's a comedian who does it for Caesars too, but right? Why not then go that step? Why not find somebody who's interested in doing an RG ad instead of just the celebrities pumping the free plays and looking at certain populations? Absolutely. Yeah. Working with colleges and universities has been a struggle. Which is again, why I give so much credit to Greg and his team and University of Cincinnati, seeing this opportunity and wanting to get engaged. But what's really interesting is normally a quote like this would be outdated. Not only is this relevant, but I think it's even more relevant now than when Howard Schaeffer from Harvard University said it in 2001. So I'm just going to read it. There's no federal mandate obliging schools to educate students or parents about the dangers of excessive gambling, unlike the Drug Free Schools and Communities Act of 1989, requiring drug and alcohol education. When combined with the lack of initiative by colleges to develop gambling policies, there's clear potential for student-related gambling disorders to emerge. Government mandates requiring gambling policies, as with alcohol, could have a positive influence on the gambling activities of college students, as well as the overall culture of responsibility on campuses. I completely agree with that, and I've used this quote to help get into colleges to talk about cultures of responsibility and have conversations around problem gambling and responsible gambling with students and faculty, and of course, more at-risk populations. You're seeing a lot of programming for student athletes. I may talk about student athletes a little bit. I was one. I never received any gambling education, you know, when I was a student athlete. But yeah, so there, you know, colleges have formal, written, black and white on paper policies for substances, for alcohol, for nicotine. 80% of colleges in a recent study have formal policies on hookah smoke. Less than 50 have them on gambling. You know, I'm not going to say one issue is related to the other, but you know, we might think that gambling might have some further down the line consequences than hookah smoke, right? But there's formal policies on that, not gambling. So how can we work, I think, collaboratively and holistically with everybody, with schools of social work, with athletic departments, with policymakers, to get a more robust awareness of what our students are doing, what's going on, and how to help them, right? Is gambling discussed in recovery programs or sober housing for students? Maybe, probably not, I don't know, right? Are the counselors on campus aware of gambling disorder and how to have those conversations? RAs, right? So we need to bring it up to the level that it is with the other substances. Yeah.
How old do you have to be to gamble?
That's a great question, Maureen. How old do you have to be to gamble? It is different, right? Which is really interesting in comparing it to alcohol, right? 18 to play or purchase lottery products and bet on horses, 21 for casinos and sports. So that's interesting, right? That we consider different types of gambling either more dangerous or you have to be older to do it, right? That would be like you could drink beer at 18, but you can't have hard liquor till 21, right? I know that's a little flippant, but right, why are different types of gambling at a different age? It's really interesting, right? And when you look at the venues now, the racinos have, again, they have slot machines and horses. So if I'm over here, I can be 18 and betting on horses, but right over here, these machines, I have to be 21. So what procedures are put in place at these venues that have both of the age discrepancies to make sure that people aren't going from side to side or playing responsibly, things like that? It gets muddy and they get a little gray. just because we're on the topic of age. It's something that's, near and dear to my heart. We again didn't want to have another protection we fought for that we didn't get, and again, we got good ones. Was not betting on college sports in Ohio. There are states where you can't bet on college sports. New York is one. You can bet on the Giants and the Jets. You can't bet on colleges in New York. That wasn't going to get passed because of, 2 hours north, right? That's why nobody wants to bet on the Bengals or the Cavs. They want to bet on the Buckeyes, right? So getting no college sports in this state wasn't going to happen. That wasn't going to happen. We weren't going to die on that hill. We were told it's not going to happen. Don't even worry about it. But what's interesting is, a general percentage, 75% of student athletes aren't of age to gamble. They're 18, 19, and 20 years old, right? Some are 21, some stay back a fifth year, they're 22, maybe even 23, but most of them aren't of age to gamble, yet we allow them to be gambled upon. Talk about getting into that eerie, predatory kind of feeling, right? And what you're seeing, which is fantastic, is more student athletes standing up and showing screenshots of their Twitters or Facebooks where people are harassing them. I can't believe you missed that shot. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to find you because people are, right? I'm so glad you said that. I wanted to say it, but I don't know if I should. People are crazy, right? And they're tweeting at 18-year-olds, I'm going to kill you. And one, they shouldn't have to deal with that for one thing. But two, if I'm pissed at LeBron James for missing a shot, I can't go find him. If Valeric lives down the hall from me, I can go find him, right? So it's not just protections for the people who are gambling. We need to make sure they're doing it responsibly. We need to make sure there's resources for them. We need to protect the people that are being gambled upon, right? So that's my little soapbox. Not a lot of people were betting on D2 cross country, but there was a lot of weight on my shoulders being a student athlete, right? And I wasn't a Bearcat basketball player. But so imagine what it's like to be a student athlete at a D1 school and getting harassed by some crazy guy down the hall. So I think, again, we need to be holistic. Greg needs to be at the table, but so does the athletic director, so does the dean, right? All this stuff, all these people. Here's one area. ICRG has a list of some bullet points to help colleges get started if they're going to develop a policy on gambling. I'm not going to go over this. This is for your information. Iowa Department of Public Health has actually developed a really good one. They've got some bullet points. This is all stuff you can look at later, but we do have a good campaign. You see it outside, Get Set Before You Bet. And there is a college micro campaign. This toolkit is free to use. There's posters, rap cards, radio spots, TV spots, all sorts of good stuff that, again, is targeted towards college students. So things are happening, which is good. These are, again, some bullet points, eliminate advertising for gambling operators, which we have in Ohio. You cannot advertise on a college campus, which is good. We agree with that. You can gamble on colleges, but you can't advertise. The operators can't come on. They can't send things to college students. Things that you might not think about, like blocking gambling sites on school computers, things like that. Like there's a lot of ways that we can start putting some protections in place. Which takes me to the collaboration, why we need more people involved and why we need to think outside the box to kind of create some creative ways to do some of this work. Collaboration, we often think about common goals, utilization of each other's strengths and network and expertise. That's why we collaborate, right? Because other people, other professionals have networks, have information, have experiences that we don't, so we can work together. But what I think sometimes the missing piece is, or why sometimes collaborations fail or aren't as impactful as they could be, is that connection and empowerment. How are we actually connecting with the people we're working with and with, in this case, students that we're working with and trying to empower, right? So I think student leadership is a really big piece. Oh, I meant to do this activity. Too excited, right? But has anybody ever seen this problem before, the 9 dots problem. I'm seeing some head shaking. Yeah, this is where the term thinking outside the box comes from. You know, it actually comes from advertising, to try to get advertising executives to think outside the box or outside the norm. The goal is to connect, 9 dots in 4 lines, and you can't, of course, that's not working. Of course, you end up finding that you can't do it. Oh my goodness gracious. Right? People go like this, okay, that's 4 lines, that didn't work. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, I left the middle one. And the answer, as you see, you can only connect the dots if you think outside the box, right? So new ways, innovative ways of doing things and thinking. And what I'm gonna get to is a program I did at Case Western. I've been trying to do at other schools to get students involved and think outside the box in terms of problem gambling education. But the questions are, and hopefully the answers are the keys to how we collaborate well with each other are these questions. What topics do we combine problem gambling with? As I said before, you go talk to somebody, I want to talk about problem gambling, they say we have bigger fish to fry, right? So, okay, what can I combine it with that is your fish, right? What fish do you need fried? Can we combine these issues or topics together? Who do we work with and how do we shape the message? So what topics do we combine it with? Well, we have to know what students are experiencing, right? Ton of data on what students are experiencing during their college years, but I'm just going to show some because it's mine, so I don't have to credit anybody else. 912 Greek life students over 2 years, and it's a little old, but still relevant. Look at some of those numbers. Does anything jump out? There's a big one that jumps out to me. Obviously, they're all big numbers, but
Suicide.
Couple big ones.
so yeah, that's the one that gets me, right? 18.7 college students, 18.7% or 174 out of 900 self-reporting suicidal thoughts. I think self-harm jumps out as big, 1 in 10, right? 10%. Obviously high rates of depression, anxiety, we could imagine that, not diminishing those numbers, but some pretty serious things are going on here, right?